Hello everybody, it's Sarah and today I want to share with you what I read in May. As always, I have already done a mid-month wrap-up, so if you want to know which books I read in the first half of the month and my thoughts on them, I will leave that link down below and up there in the eye as well. Last month I had the goal to finish all the books that were on my currently reading pile, and I'm happy to say that I managed to do that, but it's also the reason why I decided not to pick up any of the books from my normal TBR jar, because I just felt like it was too much stress and I didn't want to deal with that, and so I just didn't read any of those 3 books because reading is supposed to be fun. But anyway, before we get into the books that I actually did read this month, let me share some stats with you. I read a total of 7 books this month, and then I also had 1 DNF, but that DNF I will not count in my stats this month because I only read 100 out of 800 pages, so I just don't feel like it's worth mentioning or worth putting it into my stats. All the books that I read this month were adult, and all of the books that I read this month were new to me, so I didn't have any rereads. Genre-wise, my stats were actually a bit different from usual because I read 3 classics and then the other 4 books were all fantasy, 3 of them were high fantasy and 1 of them was urban fantasy. And now we come to something interesting. Because 7 books in a month so far I think is the month where I read the second least amount of books within a month this year so far. However, page-wise, this month was actually the second most pages I read in a month because I read over 5,300 pages. And that kind of shows you how subjective and how arbitrary it is how much we really read. And don't feel bad if you're someone who feels like you don't read a lot of books, but you just read so many big high fantasy books, because it's just, reading should be fun anyway, and it's all subjective. So yeah, I read a lot of 500 plus to 1,000 plus page books this month, so I had a lot of pages that I had to get through. Then star rating wise, I'm all over the place. I had 2 4.5 stars, 1 4-star, 2 3-stars and 2 2-stars, and that apparently came out to an average of 2.6 stars per book, which seems quite low to me because I feel like I generally did enjoy my books this month, but yeah, that's what my calculations came out to be, so yeah. And now let me get into the books, and as always I'll go by star rating. The book that I enjoyed least this month is Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann. This is a German classic and it belongs in the realm of exile literature, so I guess you would call it modern classic because it was written around 1945, I think. It was written during the Second World War. And exile literature, just as a quick explanation, because I'm not sure how many people are aware of what that is. We learn about it in school, and it's like we have to read books of the genre of exile literature in school quite a bit. But it's kind of this time period during and also after the Second World War where there were a lot of authors that, either because of their heritage or also just because they spoke out, had to flee Germany and Austria. And so the books that they wrote kind of dealing with the trauma of exile and dealing with their exile and dealing with what happened in their home countries during the Second World War is what in German literature is generally called exile literature, because it was written in exile, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's just generally a really interesting genre of classics that has a lot of really dark stuff, which is why I often don't enjoy reading it because it's depressing. But anyway, this specific book, Dr. Faustus, was also written in exile, of course, by Thomas Mann, either in Switzerland or in the United States. I am not 100% sure. And it's of course a retelling of the Faustus cycle, kind of, that has been retold again and again. The 2 most famous retellings of the Faust saga are by Christopher Marlowe as well as Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And in this, the role of Faust is taken by this genius musician Adrian Leverkühn. And this book is supposed to be a fictional biography of this musician. And on the one hand, I can see a lot of great things in this book, like there's the parallels between Adrian Leverkühn and kind of the downfall and the I don't want to say corruption, because corruption seems the wrong word, but like the corruption perversion of the German people at the beginning of the 20th century that then led to the Second World War. And in between, there's just paragraphs that are absolutely beautiful to read. However, overall, I just found the writing really, really hard to get into because the sentences were so fucking long, which made it really boring. Also, I found it kind of hard that it was written as a fictional biography because there wasn't that much plot to the book because of that, and it is quite long. It's almost 700 pages. And then also the last thing, I found that the character of Adrian Leverkühn wasn't even that much in the center of the book. It was mostly about the person who wrote the fictional biography, and it just kind of, I don't know. I just appreciated some things of this book, but overall I just found it to be really, really boring and long-winded and just not my style of book. The next book I want to talk about is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the second book in the Poppy War series, and it's a Chinese history-inspired adult high fantasy series in which we follow Rin, who is a peasant girl who against all expectations manages to get into this really renowned military academy and to then get into the military and the army and so on. And it's kind of her story and the story of this fictionalized China that deals a lot with historical things that did actually happen in like real life China. And I also sadly only gave this 2 stars. I enjoyed it more than the Poppy War, which made me really angry, and I only gave the Poppy War 1 star. But I won't talk too much on my thoughts of this because I will have a spoiler-free review up on it either on Sunday or on Tuesday, and then probably a week or so later I will have a spoiler discussion up on my channel as well. However, overall, what I would say is that I just don't like Rin. I find her a really annoying character. I really like the concepts that R.F. Kuang has and kind of tries to execute. However, I personally am not a fan of the execution of those concepts, and I find they mostly fall flat or end up being really boring. So yeah, that's kind of my short thoughts on this book. Next, I have a book that I started ages ago, and that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which I finally finished. And this is a quite well-known Victorian classic, and in it we follow Pip, who is an orphan that was taken in by his sister and her husband, and one day he's called to this big old mansion with this old woman who's still in her wedding dress, and the story unfolds from there. He comes into some great expectations, he gets some money, he comes to London, and it's just a really Dickens book. And I really enjoy Dickens' writing style. However, I find that the story in Dickens' works, at least, I mean, I only read Oliver Twist so far, but it often takes quite a bit to kind of get into the plot. And the first 2/3 of the book, you just get to know all the characters. And if you like it, then good. And for me, I'm kind of like, I mean, the plot could start a bit earlier, but it's not like I didn't enjoy it because of that. You know what I mean? So I gave this 3 stars overall. Then next I want to talk about Fires of Hern, which is book 5 in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. And I'm slowly but surely working my way through it. I'm just in between. I kind of have the hope that maybe I'm gonna finish the series by the end of the year, maybe not. We'll see. But I'm kind of picking up speed, so to speak. And the series is one of the staples of high fantasy series. And this is kind of the series that's Robert Jordan's take on The Lord of the Rings and kind of his take on this very classic end of the world story where you also have this chosen one that kind of is very reluctant, and you have warring factions that just vie for power and so on, and it's just massive and huge, and I'm definitely starting to enjoy this more and more, which I think might be because I finally decided to just pick the books up one after another and don't let years pass in between them. So yeah, and I'm already started the 6th book and definitely excited to continue on. The last book that I want to talk about, the one that I absolutely enjoyed most this month, is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This is a French classic from the 19th century. I think it was written in the second half of the 19th century sometime, because it was like the beginning of the book is set during like Napoleon, after the Napoleonic Wars, but when Napoleon came to France for a second time. So my guess it was probably written like 30 to 50 years after that. And so in this book we follow this young man whose life seems to be going perfectly. He's about to be made captain of this ship. He's about to marry the love of his childhood, of his life. But there's some people who do not want him to be happy, so they get him thrown into jail. And once he gets out of prison, he swears revenge on the people responsible. And I absolutely loved it. I honestly didn't think I would love this book so much, especially since it was over 1,000 pages. It's quite intimidating, it's quite long. However, I just really enjoyed it. I have never read a classic that was so easy to read. It basically read like a modern book, aside from the fact that the characters were a bit more dramatic, which is just so entertaining. And of course, there's slower parts throughout the book. I would say like the first third of the book or so is very fast and you get into the story very quickly. However, I have to say you gotta be careful. You gotta know at least a little bit about French history at the time. Because, for example, Napoleon is never mentioned as Napoleon, but mostly just as the usurper. And so, of course, you have to know who that is that they're talking about. You have to know about the royalists, the Bonapartists, and so on. Then I would say the middle part is a little bit slow and can drag at bits. But again, not too much, because I found the writing style to be very easily readable, and also the chapters are really short. A lot of the chapters are around or under 10 pages, so you're just kind of flipping through them very quickly. But one of the reasons why it's very slow is because kind of Dumas starts throwing characters at you and just expects you to remember when like 20 chapters before he was mentioned once and who that was and how the character is in relation to all the other characters. And then also sometimes you just suddenly focus on stuff that seems to have nothing to do with the main plot and you're like, can we get back to the important stuff? I'm not interested in what's happening right here. But then the last third, everything comes together and it's so incredibly satisfying. And also Edmond Dantès is one of the most adorable characters I have ever read about. I love him so much, and I rarely read classics where I'm like, I absolutely love the characters in this, but that was the case here, and I just loved it. I loved the drama of it, I loved the revenge story, I loved how everything came together, and I gave it 4.5 stars because it did drag a little bit in the middle, and I'm guessing some people would probably use that as a reason to set it down and not pick it up again, but it's totally worth pushing through. I can like highly recommend it. So that was it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below if you had a successful reading month in May. If you have read any of the books that I have read this month, what are your thoughts on them? I will once again in this description box next to the links to my social media have all the links to all the resources of Black Lives Matter, from book recommendations to places where you can donate, to petitions you can sign, to videos of Black booktubers talking about the situation. I will always leave those videos linked down below, I'm guessing for at least the next few weeks. And so yeah, I hope you have a good day and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!